This is 98.7 FM, Outbreak FM broadcasting from Miami, Florida. My name is David Morgan, and it's currently 6:47 p.m. on what has been an absolutely beautiful Saturday evening in South Florida. If you're just tuning in, whether you're on the beach watching the sunset, stuck in traffic on I-95, or getting ready for a night out in Brickell or Wynwood, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because the situation that's developing across Miami-Dade County right now is unlike anything any of us have ever experienced before. And your survival may depend on understanding the severity of what's happening in the next few minutes. Sarah Chen and I have been broadcasting our regular weekend show from our studio in downtown Miami for the past 4 hours, playing music and taking calls about weekend plans and talking about the perfect weather we've been having. 82 degrees, light breeze off the Atlantic, clear skies, the kind of evening that makes you remember why people moved to Miami in the first place. But approximately 23 minutes ago at 6:24 p.m., everything changed in a way that I'm still struggling to process, even as I'm describing it to you right now. At 6:24 p.m., Miami Beach Police Department responded to what was initially reported as a violent assault on Ocean Drive near 10th Street, right in the heart of the Art Deco district where thousands of tourists and locals gather every weekend evening. The initial report described an individual attacking multiple people on the crowded sidewalk outside one of the restaurants, biting victims with what witnesses described as savage, animalistic aggression. When officers arrived on scene within 3 minutes of the call, they found a scene that the first responding officer described over police radio as unlike anything I've seen in 15 years on the job. The suspect, an adult male whose identity hasn't been released, had attacked at least 7 people in the few minutes between the initial assault and police arrival. When officers attempted to subdue him using standard verbal commands and physical restraint techniques, he showed no response whatsoever, no recognition of police authority, no reaction to pain compliance holds, and no indication that he understood or cared that he was being given lawful orders. When one officer deployed his taser, the suspect appeared to not even notice the electrical current that should have incapacitated him. Immediately, when physical force was applied, when he was struck with batons, when pepper spray was deployed directly into his face, he continued attacking anyone within reach with the single-minded focus of biting exposed skin. What happened next is where the situation transitions from a violent criminal incident into something that I don't have adequate words to describe. Sarah is monitoring Miami Beach PD communications right now, and she's hearing reports of similar incidents occurring simultaneously across South Beach. Ocean Drive between 5th and 15th Streets has at least 6 separate violent assault reports. Lincoln Road Mall has multiple incidents. Collins Avenue near the hotels has reports coming in. Washington Avenue in the Club District has officers responding to mass casualty events. We're talking about dozens of incidents across just South Beach alone, all occurring within the same 30-minute window, all matching the same disturbing pattern of individuals attacking strangers, with biting as the primary method of assault. The critical piece of information that's changing how we understand this situation came from Jackson Memorial Hospital at 6:39 p.m. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who's the head of their emergency department and someone I've known professionally for 8 years, through our coverage of medical stories, called me directly on my cell phone to tell me something she said she would never have believed if she hadn't witnessed it herself. She told me that victims who were brought in from the Ocean Drive incident, people who were attacked and bitten, are showing rapid onset of symptoms including extremely high fever spiking above 105 degrees Fahrenheit, violent behavioral changes, complete loss of verbal communication, and aggressive attacks on hospital staff and other patients within 15 to 20 minutes of arriving at the emergency room. Dr. Rodriguez described watching a patient who was alert and responsive when paramedics brought her in, who was answering questions about what happened to her, who was a functioning human being in every sense, and then watching that same patient deteriorate over the course of 12 minutes into someone who didn't respond to her own name, who couldn't or wouldn't speak, who became violent when staff tried to examine her, and who attempted to bite a nurse who was trying to take her blood pressure. She told me that she's now treating 17 patients from various South Beach incidents, and all 17 are showing identical symptom progression at nearly identical rates, which suggests this isn't random individual medical emergencies, but rather some kind of coordinated outbreak of something she doesn't have a name for yet. At 6:42 p.m., the Miami Beach Police Chief made the decision to close Ocean Drive to vehicle and pedestrian traffic from 5th Street to 15th Street. This is peak tourist season. This is Saturday evening, when Ocean Drive generates millions of dollars in restaurant and nightlife revenue, and shutting down that corridor represents recognition that whatever is happening is serious, enough to override economic concerns. Officers are attempting to clear the area and direct people to shelter in nearby hotels or businesses, but you can't evacuate thousands of tourists and locals from a crowded beachfront strip in minutes, and the chaos of trying to move that many people while managing multiple active assault situations is overwhelming the available police resources. Sarah just handed me an update from the Florida Department of Health. They're dispatching emergency response teams from their Tallahassee headquarters, but those teams are 350 miles away, and even with priority transport, we're looking at minimum 4 to 5 hours before they arrive. The Miami-Dade Department of Health is activating their Emergency Operations Center and coordinating with local hospitals, but they're starting from a position of having no idea what pathogen they're dealing with, no confirmed treatment protocols, and no clear understanding of transmission vectors beyond the obvious bite injuries. The first confirmed death occurred at 6:49 p.m. A victim who was attacked on Ocean Drive, who was transported to Mount Sinai Medical Center on Miami Beach, died from what the attending physician described as catastrophic neurological failure. What makes this death particularly significant is the timeline. The victim was attacked at approximately 6:27 p.m. and pronounced dead at 6:49 p.m., which is a 22-minute window from exposure to death. That's an extraordinarily rapid progression for any kind of infection or toxin, and it suggests we're dealing with something that operates at a speed far beyond normal disease pathology. At 6:53 p.m., and this is where the situation becomes something I never thought I would report as fact, that deceased patient at Mount Sinai reanimated. I'm using that word very deliberately because I don't have a better medical term for what hospital staff are describing. The patient who was pronounced dead, whose heart had stopped, who had no respiratory function, who met all clinical criteria for death, sat up approximately for minutes after being pronounced and attacked a nurse who was in the room, preparing the body for transport to the morgue. When other staff responded and attempted to restrain this individual, they found that standard restraint methods were completely ineffective, and that the individual showed no vital signs consistent with life despite being mobile and aggressive. Sarah is monitoring radio traffic from Miami Beach, Miami Police Department, Miami-Dade Police, Florida Highway Patrol, and she's hearing reports that match this pattern from locations across the entire Miami metropolitan area. Downtown Miami near Bayside Marketplace has incident reports. Brickell has reports. Coconut Grove has reports. Coral Gables has reports. Hialeah has reports. Little Havana has reports. Aventura has reports. The northern suburbs like North Miami Beach and Sunny Isles have reports. We're talking about incidents spanning from Homestead in the south, all the way to the Broward County line in the north, which is a geographic area covering hundreds of square miles, and including a population of approximately 2.7 million people. The challenge we're facing, and I need everyone listening to understand this clearly, is that Miami's urban geography makes this situation uniquely dangerous. We have one of the densest urban cores in the United States, with over 300,000 people living in just downtown Miami and Brickell alone. We have South Beach with tens of thousands of tourists concentrated on a barrier island, with only 3 causeways providing access to the mainland. We have neighborhoods like Little Haiti and Liberty City with high population density and limited emergency service resources. We have retiree communities with elderly populations who are particularly vulnerable. And we have the Everglades immediately to the west, which means population movement is channeled along the coastal corridor, with limited escape routes inland. At 7:04 p.m., The city of Miami announced a citywide shelter-in-place order effective immediately. Residents are being told to get inside the nearest building, secure doors and windows, and avoid all contact with anyone showing signs of illness or aggressive behavior. All major events scheduled for tonight, including concerts, sports events, and club openings, are being canceled. The Port of Miami is suspending all cruise ship operations pending further assessment. Miami International Airport is implementing enhanced screening, but has not suspended operations yet, which concerns me greatly, because aircraft full of passengers departing Miami could be spreading whatever this is to destinations worldwide before symptoms become apparent. Sarah just received word from her roommate, who works as a server at a restaurant in Wynwood. She's reporting that the restaurant locked its doors at 7 p.m. after seeing people on the street attacking others. She estimates there are approximately 40 customers and staff barricaded inside the restaurant, and they can see through the windows what she describes as infected individuals wandering the streets outside. They can hear screaming from other buildings. They can see other people running, and they have no idea whether they should stay barricaded or try to evacuate to somewhere safer. The first police officer casualty occurred at 7:11 p.m. An officer responding to an incident in Little Havana was attacked by multiple individuals matching the pattern we've been describing, and despite backup arriving within minutes, the officer sustained bite injuries to his arm and neck. He's being transported to Jackson Memorial under police escort, and his fellow officers are reporting that he's already showing early symptoms including fever and behavioral changes during the transport. This represents confirmation that whatever is causing these attacks can be transmitted to law enforcement personnel who are trained and equipped to handle violent situations, which means standard police response protocols are inadequate for this threat. At 7:17 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez called again with updated information that fundamentally changes our understanding of the transmission timeline. She's now observed a complete progression in multiple patients from initial bite exposure through symptom onset, through death, through reanimation. Based on her direct observation of 14 complete cases, the average timeline is bite exposure at minute 0, first symptoms including fever and confusion appearing at minute 8 to 12, complete loss of higher cognitive function at minute 15 to 20, clinical death at minute 20 to 35, and reanimation occurring 2 to 4 minutes after clinical death. What this means practically is that from the moment someone is bitten, you have a maximum window of about 40 minutes before that person is up and attacking others, with the average being closer to 30 minutes. She also confirmed what we've been hearing anecdotally, which is that individuals who have reanimated do not respond to pain, do not show vital signs consistent with life, do not communicate or show recognition of people they knew before, and attack any living person they encounter with focused aggression centered on biting. She's describing behavior that matches what you'd see in rabies patients, but compressed into a timeline of minutes instead of weeks, and with 100% consistency. Across all observed cases, she emphasized multiple times during our conversation that she has no medical explanation for how reanimation after clinical death is possible, that it violates everything she understands about human physiology, but that she's watched it happen 14 times now, and she needs everyone to understand that once someone is bitten, there is no available treatment that can prevent the progression to death and reanimation. The MacArthur Causeway connecting Miami Beach to mainland Miami was closed to all traffic at 7:23 p.m. after multiple vehicle accidents involving drivers who became symptomatic while driving. The causeway is now blocked by abandoned and crashed vehicles with no way to clear them quickly, because tow truck operators are refusing to respond to the area due to infected individuals present on the roadway. This effectively traps everyone currently on Miami Beach on that barrier island, with only the Venetian Causeway and the Julia Tuttle Causeway potentially available for evacuation. And both of those routes are experiencing similar problems with accidents and infected pedestrians. At 7:29 p.m., Sarah's monitoring social media, and she's seeing video footage being uploaded from all across Miami, showing scenes that look like something from a horror film. Infected individuals attacking people on Flagler Street downtown. People barricading themselves inside shops on Lincoln Road. Families running through parking garages at the Dadeland Mall trying to escape infected. Drivers abandoning their cars on I-95 and running on foot because traffic is completely gridlocked. The footage is graphic. It's spreading virally across every platform. And it's causing mass panic as people watch their city descend into chaos in real time. The Miami-Dade Police Department reported at 7:34 p.m. that they're experiencing complete system overload with 911 calls. They're receiving thousands of emergency calls every minute. Hold times are exceeding 30 minutes, and many calls are being abandoned because people are being attacked before operators can answer. The department is activating all off-duty personnel and requesting mutual aid from neighboring counties. But the scale of this crisis is already beyond what local law enforcement can handle with available resources. Officers are being told to prioritize life-threatening situations, which in this case means basically every call they're receiving, and to use whatever force is necessary to stop individuals who are attacking others. At 7:41 p.m., we received our first call from someone actually trapped in a dangerous situation. His name is Carlos, and he's in a condo tower in Brickell, with approximately 200 other residents. He's reporting that infected individuals got into the building before security could lock down, and they're moving through the floors attacking anyone they encounter. Residents are barricading themselves in their units, but Carlos says he can hear screaming from other floors, and he's terrified that the infected will break into his apartment. Sarah advised him to barricade his door with furniture. Move to an interior room away from the entry. Stay quiet to avoid attracting attention. And wait for police or military response. But honestly, we have no idea when or if help will arrive for people in his situation. The first National Guard units were activated at 7:47 p.m. when the governor declared a state of emergency for Miami-Dade County and requested federal assistance. However, Guard units need to be recalled from wherever they are on a Saturday evening. Assembled at armories, briefed on an unprecedented situation, equipped appropriately, and then transported to deployment locations. Best case scenario, we're looking at National Guard presence on Miami streets in 3 to 4 hours, which means we're on our own with local police and fire rescue until approximately 11 p.m. At the earliest, at 7:53 p.m., Miami International Airport made the decision to suspend all departing flights and to divert all arriving flights to other airports. They're reporting incidents inside multiple terminals including Concourse D, where international flights arrive, and they're evacuating passengers and staff to secure areas while dealing with infected individuals who are attacking people in gate areas and concourses. This is one of the busiest airports in the United States, serving over 45 million passengers annually. And it's now completely shut down with thousands of travelers trapped inside terminals. Where infected are present, the Metroroll and Metromover systems shut down at 7:58 p.m. after infected individuals were reported on trains and at stations. The shutdown stranded thousands of passengers who use the systems for transportation, and many of those passengers are now trapped on platforms or inside stations with infected individuals present and no way to safely evacuate. The transit systems that normally move hundreds of thousands of people through Miami every day have become death traps where crowds of people are concentrated in enclosed spaces with limited exits. At 8:04 p.m., we received confirmation that the infection has spread beyond Miami-Dade County into Broward County to the north. Fort Lauderdale is reporting incidents matching the Miami pattern. Hollywood has reports. Pompano Beach has reports. The infection appears to be spreading through normal traffic flow as infected individuals, or people who were exposed but haven't shown symptoms yet, drive north on I-95 or US 1. Broward County authorities are implementing their own emergency response, but they're starting from the same position of confusion and insufficient resources that Miami is dealing with. The Port of Miami reported at 8:11 p.m. that a cruise ship that departed this morning is experiencing an outbreak on board. Passengers who boarded the ship while already infected, but not yet symptomatic, are now attacking other passengers and crew. The ship is approximately 20 miles offshore with over 3,000 people aboard, and the captain is requesting emergency assistance while maintaining position outside the port. because returning to Miami would risk introducing more infected into an already catastrophic situation. The Coast Guard is responding, but they don't have protocols for dealing with a floating outbreak scenario on a massive cruise vessel. At 8:17 p.m., I need to pause our emergency coverage for just a moment to speak directly to everyone who's been listening for the past 90 minutes. If this broadcast is helping you understand what's happening, if the information we're providing is helping you make better decisions about your safety, if knowing that someone is out here documenting this crisis makes you feel less alone during what is probably the most terrifying experience of your life, then please stay with us. Sarah and I are committed to continuing this broadcast for as long as we have power, and as long as we're safe. We're not leaving. We're here with you through whatever comes next. More updates will follow. Drive.Rodriguez called again at 8:23 p.m. with information about infection vectors. Based on her observations of transmission patterns, bite exposure is the primary and possibly only method of infection. She hasn't seen any evidence of airborne transmission, casual contact transmission, or any route other than direct fluid exchange through broken skin. This is actually good news relative to worst-case scenarios, because it means infection requires direct violent contact rather than just being in proximity to infected individuals. The bad news is that in any close-quarters situation where infected are present, the biting transmission method is devastatingly effective. The first systematic clearing operation began at 8:29 p.m. when Miami police SWAT teams entered a hotel on Ocean Drive, where approximately 300 guests and staff were trapped with an unknown number of infected individuals moving through the floors. The operation is being conducted floor by floor, room by room, with the goal of eliminating infected individuals and evacuating uninfected people to safety. Early reports indicate the operation is making progress, but at significant cost and ammunition expenditure and risk to officers who have to engage infected at close range in confined hotel corridors. At 8:34 p.m., the power grid started experiencing failures in some neighborhoods. The combination of damaged infrastructure from the chaos, utility workers abandoning their posts to seek safety, and increased load from everyone sheltering indoors with lights and electronics on has caused overload conditions that are triggering protective shutdowns. Parts of Liberty City are dark, sections of Overtown have no power, and Miami Beach is experiencing rolling failures. Darkness is going to make this crisis exponentially worse, because infected individuals will be harder to see and avoid, and people trapped in dark buildings will be more vulnerable and more terrified. Sarah's roommate reported at 8:41 p.m. that infected individuals have broken into the Wynwood restaurant where she's sheltering. The 40 people inside are trying to barricade themselves in the kitchen and storage areas, but they can hear the infected moving through the dining room, destroying furniture, and searching for victims. She's terrified. She's asking Sarah what they should do, and Sarah's trying to advise her while fighting back tears, because her friend is in immediate danger, and there's nothing we can do to help. From our broadcast position, the first confirmed military deployment occurred at 8:47 p.m. when a National Guard unit that was coincidentally already assembled for a training exercise in Homestead was diverted to Miami with orders to assist law enforcement in establishing security perimeters and protecting critical infrastructure. This unit of approximately 120 soldiers with armored vehicles represents our first military-level response capability. Though 120 soldiers in a metropolitan area of 2.7 million people is barely a token force given the scale of the crisis. At 8:53 p.m., we received reports that some residential buildings are successfully defending themselves through coordinated action by residents. A condo complex in Coral Gables organized all able-bodied residents into security teams, armed themselves with whatever weapons were available, and posted guards at all entry points to prevent infected from entering. They've successfully repelled 3 separate attempts by infected to breach their perimeter, and they're proving that organized groups with adequate preparation can defend fixed positions against infected attacks. The Centers for Disease Control announced at 9 p.m. that they're deploying a rapid response team from Atlanta, but similar to earlier estimates for other agencies, We're looking at minimum 4 to 5 hours before they arrive. The CDC team will bring expertise in outbreak investigation and response, but they're going to arrive to a situation that's already hours into exponential spread, with potentially tens of thousands of infected individuals across the metropolitan area. Whatever containment might have been possible in the first hour is no longer possible now. At 9:07 p.m., Sarah's roommate stopped responding to messages. We don't know if her phone died, if she's hiding in silence, or if something worse happened. Sarah's devastated, but trying to stay focused on the broadcast, because helping thousands of other people is the only thing giving her a sense of purpose while her friend's status is unknown. This is the emotional reality of crisis, where you're simultaneously terrified for people you love while trying to help strangers survive. The infection count estimates started coming in at 9:14 p.m. Miami-Dade police estimate somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 infected individuals, based on incident reports and known transmission rates. Dr. Rodriguez estimates that every infected individual creates an average of 3 to 5 new infections before being neutralized or degrading to the point of immobility. If those numbers are accurate, we're looking at exponential growth that could consume the entire metropolitan population within 12 to 24 hours without aggressive intervention. At 9:21 p.m., the MacArthur Causeway was completely overrun by infected individuals. The earlier accidents and blockages created a concentration point where infected could ambush people trapped in vehicles. And now the causeway is essentially a bridge full of infected attacking anyone trying to cross in either direction. Miami Beach is now effectively isolated with tens of thousands of people trapped on that barrier island with limited food, water, and no clear evacuation route. The Venetian Causeway was closed at 9:28 p.m. due to similar problems with infected on the roadway and structural concerns about the vintage bridges that make up the causeway. This leaves only the Julia Tuttle Causeway potentially available for evacuation from Miami Beach, and that route is experiencing massive traffic jams as everyone remaining on the beach tries to use the single available exit simultaneously. At 9:34 p.m., we received our first report of infected individuals exhibiting coordinated behavior. Multiple witnesses in downtown Miami described groups of infected moving together, following each other, concentrating in areas where uninfected people were hiding. Dr. Rodriguez cautioned against attributing intelligence to this behavior, noting that even simple stimulus response patterns can create the appearance of coordination. But the practical effect is that infected are becoming more dangerous as they move in groups rather than as isolated individuals. The sunset occurred at 9:41 p.m., and the transition from twilight to full darkness began. I need everyone listening to understand that the next few hours are going to be the most dangerous of this entire crisis. Visibility is dropping. Infected are harder to see. People trying to navigate or evacuate are more likely to encounter infected without warning. And the psychological terror of being in darkness while infected hunt is going to push people to make panic decisions that get them killed. If you're somewhere safe right now, stay there. Don't try to move in darkness. Wait for dawn if possible. At 9:47 p.m., Miami Beach officially requested evacuation assistance from the military and Coast Guard for the approximately 40 to 50,000 people still trapped on the island. The request is for watercraft to approach the beaches and ferry people to mainland locations. But coordinating that kind of evacuation in darkness with infected present on the beaches is going to be extremely challenging and will take hours to organize even if resources are immediately available. The National Guard unit from Homestead reached downtown Miami at 9:53 p.m. and immediately engaged a large group of infected that was attacking people sheltering in the American Airlines arena. The soldiers used coordinated fire to clear the infected from the immediate area, established a defensive perimeter, and began evacuating approximately 800 people who were trapped inside the arena. This is our first successful large-scale military rescue operation, and it demonstrates that trained forces with heavy weapons can effectively engage infected when properly deployed. At 10:02 p.m., we received reports that infected individuals are starting to degrade physically. Infected from the earliest incidents, around 6:30 p.m., are now 3.5 hours into their active phase, and observers are describing them as moving more slowly, being less coordinated, and showing visible signs of tissue deterioration. If this degradation continues, it suggests infected have a limited functional lifespan, which would mean time is on our side if we can survive long enough for the infected population to degrade naturally. The Port of Miami cruise ship situation was resolved at 10:09 p.m. through a combination of ship security and passenger volunteers who fought back against infected. Using improvised weapons, they report approximately 120 infected individuals killed and thrown overboard, with roughly 200 casualties among passengers and crew who were either killed by infected or who became infected themselves and were neutralized before they could spread infection further. It's a horrific casualty count, but it's also proof that determined resistance by organized groups can stop infection spread even in worst-case confined scenarios. At 10:14 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez provided an updated degradation timeline based on extended observation. She's tracked multiple infected individuals from the earliest incidents through forearm marks, and she's seeing consistent patterns. Peak mobility and aggression occurs in the first 2 hours post-reanimation. Significant decline in coordination begins around hour 3. Major physical deterioration becomes visible around hour 4, and she's observed several infected from the absolute earliest incidents who are now approaching hour 5 and are barely mobile, shambling rather than running, and showing such severe tissue breakdown that they're likely to become completely immobile within another hour or 2. The Julia Tuttle Causeway was successfully cleared by Miami-Dade police at 10:21 p.m., using heavy equipment to push abandoned vehicles off the roadway, and officers engaging infected individuals who were attacking people trapped in the traffic jam. The causeway is now open for controlled evacuation from Miami Beach, though the rate of evacuation is limited by traffic capacity and screening requirements to ensure infected individuals aren't mixed in with evacuating civilians. This is the first major evacuation route to be secured, which provides hope that people can actually escape danger zones rather than being trapped indefinitely. At 10:27 p.m., power failed across most of Miami Beach. The island is now almost completely dark except for emergency lighting in some buildings and vehicle headlights from the evacuation traffic. This darkness creates terrifying conditions for the thousands of people still on the island trying to reach the causeway or find shelter, because they can't see infected until physical contact occurs, and the screaming you can hear in the background of calls we're receiving tells you what that means for people who encounter infected in darkness. Sarah received a message at 10:34 p.m. from her roommate. She's alive. The group in the Wynwood restaurant managed to kill the infected that entered using kitchen knives and heavy pans, and they're now barricaded in a storage room waiting for rescue. Sarah's crying with relief, and I don't blame her, because her friends survived against terrible odds through courage and desperation and sheer determination not to die. The National Guard presence in Miami reached approximately 500 soldiers by 10:41 p.m. as additional units arrived from armories around South Florida. These forces are being deployed to establish security perimeters around hospitals, police stations, fire stations, and critical infrastructure like water treatment plants and power substations. They're also beginning systematic clearing operations in downtown Miami and Brickell to eliminate infected and secure those high-density areas. At 10:47 p.m., the CDC Rapid Response Team arrived at Miami International Airport and immediately established a field laboratory in one of the cargo facilities. They're beginning analysis of blood samples, tissue samples, and trying to identify the pathogen causing the infection. Dr. Patricia Chen, leading the CDC team, acknowledged that developing treatment or prevention will take time measured in weeks or months, but understanding what we're fighting is the first step toward eventually containing it. The infection count estimates were updated at 10:53 p.m., with Miami-Dade police now estimating approximately 15,000 infected individuals. County-wide, this represents exponential growth from the 5 to 10,000 estimate 90 minutes ago. And if growth continues at this rate, we could be looking at 50,000 infected by midnight and over 100,000 by dawn. These numbers are catastrophic, but they also suggest that aggressive intervention by military forces is beginning to slow the growth rate by neutralizing infected faster than new infections are being created. At 11:02 p.m., the governor announced that he's requested federal emergency declaration and deployment of active duty military forces to South Florida. This would bring thousands of soldiers with heavy equipment, helicopters, armored vehicles, and the kind of firepower necessary to conduct operations at the scale this crisis demands. However, federal deployment will take time to organize and execute, so we're still looking at tomorrow morning at the earliest before significant federal forces arrive. The first successful neighborhood defense was reported at 11:09 p.m. from a community in Pinecrest that organized residents into security teams, established barricades at all entry points, and successfully defended their neighborhood through coordinated action. They report 0 infected penetration and 0 casualties among residents, proving that prepared communities with adequate resources can protect themselves. When official response is overwhelmed, other neighborhoods are attempting to replicate this model, with varying degrees of success depending on their resources and organization. At 11:14 p.m., Sarah and I realized we've been broadcasting for over 4 hours continuously without break. We're exhausted, we're emotionally drained, we're running on adrenaline and coffee and determination. But we're going to continue because thousands of people are still listening, still trapped, still fighting for their lives and needing information. We're not stopping. We're here for the duration of this crisis, however long that takes. Midnight is approaching at 11:19 p.m., and we're going to transition from day one to day too soon. If you've survived the first 6 hours of this outbreak, you're proving that survival is possible. You're evidence that humans can adapt and endure even when facing something as horrific as what's happening in Miami tonight. Take a moment to acknowledge you're alive. Then prepare for whatever the next 6 hours bring, because this crisis is far from over. Part 2, The Magic City Falls. This is Outbreak FM, 98.7 FM. And I'm David Morgan, continuing our emergency coverage of what has become the worst crisis in Miami's history. It's now 11:27 p.m. We're 5 hours into this nightmare, and Sarah Chen is here with me monitoring every available communication channel as we try to make sense of the chaos unfolding across our city. The sun has been down for nearly 2 hours. Darkness has transformed Miami into a hunting ground, and we're entering what I believe will be the most dangerous night any of us have ever experienced. At 11:24 p.m., Jackson Memorial Hospital reported they're at maximum capacity and can no longer accept new patients. Every bed is full, every hallway is crowded with injured people, and Dr. Rodriguez told me they're making impossible triage decisions about who gets treatment and who has to wait. The hospital has treated over 800 patients tonight, mostly bite victims, and they've watched helplessly as approximately 300 of those patients progressed through the infection timeline and had to be restrained or euthanized before reanimation. The medical staff are traumatized, exhausted, and running out of supplies, but they're continuing to work because stopping means abandoning thousands of people who still need help. The Miami-Dade Police Department reported at 11:29 p.m. that they've lost contact with over 40 officers who were responding to calls and haven't checked in. These officers are either dead, infected, trapped somewhere without communication, or they've abandoned their posts to try to protect their own families. The department started the evening with approximately 2,800 officers on duty, and they're now functionally down to maybe 2,000 officers still responding to calls. That's a catastrophic loss of capability when we need every available officer to maintain any semblance of order. At 11:36 p.m., we received our first confirmed report of infection reaching the Florida Keys. Key Largo is reporting incidents matching the Miami pattern, which means infection has spread south along US 1, the only road connecting the Keys to mainland Florida. If infection becomes established in the Keys, those communities will be trapped on islands with extremely limited resources and no realistic evacuation options beyond boats. The geography that makes the Keys beautiful also makes them death traps during an outbreak like this. The National Guard established their first major secure zone at 11:42 p.m., creating a defended perimeter around the downtown Miami Government Center. encompassing approximately 20 city blocks. They're using military vehicles to create physical barriers, posting soldiers at intersections with orders to shoot any infected on sight, and directing civilians to rally points within the perimeter where they can be protected. This is the first large-scale safe zone in Miami proper, and it represents a shift from reactive response to proactive defense of specific territory. At 11:48 p.m., Sarah's monitoring social media and seeing that what's happening in Miami has become the dominant global news story. Video footage of infected attacking people on Ocean Drive, of the MacArthur Causeway gridlock, of fires burning in Liberty City. All of it is being viewed by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Some countries are implementing travel bans for anyone coming from Florida. Others are closing their borders entirely to U.S. travelers. And there's growing international panic that this outbreak could spread globally through air. Travel before anyone realizes what's happening. The power grid experienced cascading failures at 11:54 p.m. that left approximately 60% of Miami-Dade County without electricity. The combination of infrastructure damage, overwhelmed systems, and insufficient personnel to manage the grid has caused a collapse. That's not going to be quickly fixable even if we had the resources to try. Most of Miami is now dark, which means no streetlights, no traffic signals, no building lighting except emergency generators, and vastly increased danger for anyone trying to navigate or evacuate because you can't see infected until they're close enough to attack. At midnight exactly, we crossed from Saturday into Sunday, from day 1 into day 2 of the outbreak. Sarah and I paused our broadcast for a moment of silence for everyone who didn't survive the first 6 hours. We don't have an accurate casualty count yet. Estimates range from 5,000 to 15,000 dead. But every single one of those people was someone's family member, someone's friend, someone who woke up yesterday morning with plans and hopes and no idea they'd be dead before tomorrow. The scale of loss is overwhelming, and we're only 6 hours into this crisis. The first National Guard combat fatality occurred at 12:07 a.m. During clearing operations in Overtown. A soldier was bitten by an infected individual during close quarters fighting in a narrow alley, where he couldn't maintain safe engagement distance. His fellow soldiers immediately pulled him from the line and placed him in isolation, and they're going to have to watch him progress through the infection timeline, knowing there's nothing they can do to save him. This is the burden military personnel are carrying while conducting operations that are already physically and emotionally devastating. At 12:14 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez provided critical information about the 5-hour degradation she's been observing. Infected from the earliest incidents around 6:30 p.m. are now approaching our 6, and they're showing such severe tissue breakdown that most are completely immobile. She's watched several infected literally collapse where they stood and become unable to rise or attack. If this timeline holds consistent, it means infected individuals have approximately 6 hours of mobility before degradation makes them harmless, which is crucial tactical information for planning defensive operations and estimating when areas might become safe to enter. The Julia Tuttle Causeway evacuation processed approximately 8,000 people from Miami Beach to the mainland by 12:21 a.m. That's 8,000 people who were trapped on the island who are now in safer locations. But it also means there are still 40,000 or more people on Miami Beach with limited food, water, and no power. The evacuation is continuing through the night, but at current rates, it would take another 24 hours to evacuate everyone. And we don't have 24 hours before food and water become critical issues for that population. At 12:27 a.m., we received reports that some infected are entering the water at Miami Beach and Brickell, swimming or wading into Biscayne Bay. We don't know if this is purposeful movement towards something or random behavior, but it raises disturbing questions about whether infected can swim, and whether water provides a barrier or just another transmission vector. The Coast Guard is reporting encounters with infected in the water near the causeways, and they're having to engage them with gunfire to prevent them from approaching rescue vessels. The Metrorail system became a mass grave at 12:34 a.m. The trains that were stopped on the tracks when the system shut down at 8 p.m. contained thousands of passengers who were trapped in enclosed cars with infected individuals for over 4 hours. First responders who entered the tunnels to attempt rescue found that most of the trains are full of infected or dead bodies, and extracting survivors is going to require massive operations that we don't currently have resources to conduct. The transit system that was supposed to help people evacuate became a death trap that concentrated victims in confined spaces. At 12:41 a.m., the CDC laboratory identified the pathogen causing the infection. Dr. Patricia Chen announced that it's a prion disease, similar to mad cow disease, but operating at a vastly accelerated rate. Prions are misfolded proteins that cause other proteins to misfold in a cascade effect, and they're incredibly difficult to destroy because they're not alive in the traditional sense. This means contaminated areas will remain infectious long after infected individuals are cleared, and standard cleaning methods won't eliminate the prion contamination. The CDC is recommending extreme caution in any area where infected have been present, and warning that blood, saliva, and tissue from infected individuals remain hazardous even after the infected are killed. The first successful large-scale civilian rescue occurred at 12:48 a.m. when a group of boat owners organized an impromptu flotilla to evacuate people from Miami Beach. Dozens of private boats approached the beaches, picked up hundreds of people who waded into the water to reach them, and transported them to mainland marinas where they could reach safety. It's not an official operation. It's not coordinated by authorities. It's just people helping people. And it's saving lives that would otherwise be lost waiting for official evacuation. At 12:54 a.m., I need to take a moment to speak directly to everyone who's been with us for over 6 hours now. Sarah and I are going to continue this broadcast through the entire night and into tomorrow. We have generator power, we have supplies, we have a defensible position in our studio building, and we're committed to being your source of information for as long as you need us. If this broadcast has helped you survive the first 6 hours, if knowing you're not alone has given you strength to continue, then stay with us. We're here. We're not leaving. More information will follow. The National Guard soldier who was bitten at 12:07 a.m. died at 12:59 a.m. and was immediately euthanized before reanimation could occur. His commanding officer made the decision personally, and the entire unit observed a moment of silence for their fallen brother. The soldier's name was Private Marcus Johnson. He was 23 years old. He was from Homestead, and he died defending civilians from infected during his first combat operation. He'll be remembered. At 1:06 a.m., the infection count estimate was updated to approximately 25,000 infected individuals across Miami-Dade County. This represents continued exponential growth despite military intervention, and it suggests we're still in the expansion phase of the outbreak, rather than the containment phase. The math is brutal. If each infected creates 3 new infections before being neutralized or degrading, 25,000 infected will create 75,000 new infected, which will create 225,000 infected, which means the entire county population of 2.7 million could be infected within another 12 to 18 hours without dramatically more aggressive intervention. The downtown secure zone successfully defended against its first major assault at 1:13 a.m., when approximately 300 infected attacked the perimeter from multiple directions simultaneously. National Guard soldiers engaged with coordinated machine gun fire and eliminated all 300 infected without any breaching the defensive line. This demonstrated that prepared defensive positions with adequate firepower can hold against even large numbers of infected, which provides a model for creating safe zones that can protect civilians through the crisis. At 1:19 a.m., we received reports that the Everglades are becoming a refuge for people fleeing the coastal outbreak. Thousands of people are driving west on the Tamiami Trail or Alligator Alley trying to get away from infected concentrations in the urban areas. The problem is that the Everglades have limited infrastructure, limited supplies, and environmental hazards including alligators and poisonous snakes that make them dangerous. Even without infected, people are trading one set of survival challenges for a completely different set, and it's not clear which option is actually safer. The first confirmed infection in a child under 5 years old was reported at 1:26 a.m. A 3-year-old girl at Jackson Memorial who was bitten by her infected mother is progressing through the infection timeline, and medical staff are struggling with the emotional weight of watching a child transform while being unable to do anything to save her. Dr. Rodriguez's voice was breaking when she told me about this case, and I don't blame her, because there's something particularly devastating about children dying that hits different than adult casualties, even though all death is tragedy. At 1:33 a.m., the Miami Beach boat evacuation expanded to include Coast Guard vessels and recreational boats. From marinas across South Florida, hundreds of boats are now participating in the evacuation, picking up people from beaches, from docks, from anywhere they can safely approach the shoreline. The rate of evacuation has increased to approximately 500 people per hour, which means Miami Beach could be fully evacuated within 40 to 50 hours. If the operation can be sustained, it's the first genuinely hopeful development of the night, evidence that organized civilian action can achieve results that overwhelmed official agencies cannot. The power came back on in some neighborhoods at 1:40 a.m. as utility crews working under National Guard protection managed to restore some circuits. Downtown Miami has partial power now. Parts of Coral Gables have power. Sections of Kendall have power. It's not full restoration, but having any lighting at all improves visibility and reduces the terror of operating in complete darkness. The psychological impact of lights coming back on is enormous, giving people hope that maybe we can restore some semblance of normal infrastructure, even while fighting this crisis. At 1:47 a.m., Sarah's roommate was successfully rescued from the Wynwood restaurant by a National Guard squad that cleared the area and evacuated approximately 200 civilians who were trapped in various buildings along that street. She's exhausted, she's traumatized, she's dehydrated, but she's alive and uninfected. And Sarah completely broke down crying when she got confirmation. This is what we're all experiencing emotionally. Terror for people we love mixed with overwhelming relief when they survive, all while trying to process the knowledge that thousands of others didn't make it. The first airplane departed Miami International Airport at 1:54 a.m., a cargo aircraft that was already loaded when the crisis began. The pilot made an unauthorized takeoff without clearance because staying on the ground meant eventual confrontation with infected who were approaching the aircraft across the tarmac. The plane successfully reached altitude and diverted to Atlanta, where it landed safely. This departure marks a symbolic moment, evidence that it's possible to escape Miami by air even though official evacuation flights aren't operating yet. At 2:01 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez reported observing infected who have reached R7 of their active phase. These individuals are showing such extreme degradation that they can barely move, shambling forward a few steps before collapsing. She's confident that our 8 infected will be completely immobile, which means that infected from the earliest incidents, around 6:30 p.m. should be neutralized through natural degradation by 2:30 a.m. This creates a timeline for when areas that were overrun early in the crisis might become safe to enter for rescue operations. The National Guard expanded the downtown secure zone at 2:08 a.m., pushing the perimeter outward by 4 blocks in each direction and increasing the protected area to approximately 40 city blocks. This expansion required significant combat to clear infected from the new territory, but it also more than doubled the capacity for protecting civilians. Approximately 15,000 people are now inside the downtown secure zone, with military protection, access to food and water from secured buildings, and medical care from field hospitals that have been established within the perimeter. At 2:14 a.m., we received confirmation that infection has reached Tampa on Florida's west coast. A family that evacuated from Miami before showing symptoms drove to Tampa and then transformed in a hotel, attacking other guests and creating a new outbreak cluster 100 miles from the original. Outbreak. This confirms what we've feared, which is that people fleeing Miami are spreading infection to communities across Florida and potentially beyond Florida to other states through air and ground travel. The CDC announced at 2:21 a.m. that they're recommending a federal quarantine of the entire state of Florida. No one in, no one out. All borders sealed until the outbreak can be fully contained. This would be unprecedented in modern American history. effectively isolating 22 million people. But Dr. Chen argued it's necessary to prevent what's happening in Florida from becoming a national or global pandemic. Whether federal authorities will actually implement such a quarantine remains to be seen. But the fact that CDC is recommending it tells you how seriously they're taking the containment threat. At 2:28 a.m., the infection count was revised upward again to approximately 35,000 infected individuals. The exponential growth continues despite aggressive military response, and we're now looking at 1.3% of the county population infected. Just 8 hours into the outbreak, if growth continues at this rate, we'll hit 10% infected by dawn and 50% infected by tomorrow evening. These are civilization-ending numbers for Miami as a functioning city. The soldier who was bitten earlier had to be euthanized at 2:34 a.m. Private Marcus Johnson reanimated on schedule despite the hopes of his fellow soldiers that maybe he'd be different. Maybe he'd somehow resist the infection. His commanding officer fired the shot that ended his reanimated life, and the unit is dealing with the trauma of losing one of their own while continuing operations that require them to kill dozens or hundreds of infected who were also someone's fellow soldier or friend or family member just hours ago. At 2:41 a.m., the first National Guard helicopter evacuation occurred, lifting approximately 30 people from the roof of a high-rise in Brickell, where they'd been trapped since early in the outbreak. The helicopter operations demonstrate that aerial evacuation is possible, but we only have a limited number of helicopters available, and they can only carry small numbers of people per trip. Still, it's another evacuation option that might save lives that would otherwise be lost. Sarah's monitoring reports at 2:48 a.m. that some residential communities in suburbs like Pinecrest, Palmetto Bay, and Kendall have successfully created neighborhood-level safe zones by organizing residents into defensive groups and establishing security perimeters. These communities are proving that local organization can provide protection when official response is overwhelmed, and they're sharing their tactics over social media to help other neighborhoods organize similar defenses. The first infected from the 6:30 p.m. timeline became completely immobile at 2:54 a.m., exactly 8 hours after reanimation. Dr. Rodriguez confirmed this matches her predicted timeline, as she's seeing consistent immobilization across all our 8 infected she's been tracking. This is concrete proof that infected have a limited active lifespan, which means the crisis has a built-in endpoint if we can just survive long enough for the infected population to degrade naturally. Areas that were overrun at 6:30 p.m. should be safe to enter by 3 p.m. tomorrow, once all the infected from that time period have fully degraded. At 3:01 a.m., the Coast Guard reported they've evacuated over 12,000 people from Miami Beach via boats, which combined with the 8,000 who crossed the Julia Tuttle Causeway, means we've successfully evacuated 20,000 of the estimated 50,000 people who were trapped on the island. That's 40% evacuation in just over 3 hours, which is remarkable progress. If this rate continues, Miami Beach could be fully evacuated by dawn, removing a major concentration of vulnerable civilians from a highly dangerous situation. The CDC laboratory announced at 3:08 a.m. that they've identified the molecular structure of the prion and confirmed it doesn't match any known naturally occurring prion. This is an engineered pathogen, either a deliberate biological weapon or an accidental release from research, but definitely not a natural outbreak. This raises enormous questions about where it came from, how it got released in Miami, and whether there are other outbreaks happening simultaneously in other cities. Dr. Chen is coordinating with federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies to investigate the origin, but that's a secondary concern compared to the immediate crisis of surviving the outbreak. At 3:14 a.m., military forces successfully cleared Lincoln Road Mall on Miami Beach, eliminating approximately 400 infected and securing the area. This is the first major tourist area to be fully cleared, and it provides a safe rally point for people still on Miami Beach to gather before evacuation. The clearing operation required 2 hours of sustained combat and expended enormous amounts of ammunition, but it demonstrates that methodical military clearing operations can reclaim territory from infected if sufficient force is applied. The National Guard strength in Miami reached approximately 2,000 soldiers at 3:21 a.m. as units continued arriving from across Florida. This represents significant combat power, enough to conduct multiple simultaneous operations and hold multiple secure zones. Colonel Martinez, commanding the Guard response, announced they're transitioning from defensive operations to offensive operations, with the goal of systematically clearing infected from high-priority areas and expanding secure zones to protect more civilians. At 3:28 a.m., we received reports that some evacuees from Miami are being turned away by communities in northern Florida and Georgia who don't want to risk infection spreading to their areas. Roadblocks are being established on highways. Armed residents are preventing Miami vehicles from entering their towns. And there's growing hostility toward anyone fleeing from South Florida. This is creating a refugee crisis where people who successfully escaped Miami have nowhere to go and are being forced to shelter in cars or improvised camps along highways. The power grid stabilized at 3:34 a.m. with approximately 70% of the county now having electricity. This is a major improvement from the 60% failure we saw a few hours ago, and it's enabling better coordination, better visibility, and better functioning of critical infrastructure like hospitals and water treatment. The engineers and utility workers who restored power while operating in an active outbreak zone are unsung heroes who deserve recognition once we survive this crisis. At 3:41 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez reported that Jackson Memorial has treated over 1,500 patients tonight and watched approximately 600 of them progress to infection, despite all medical intervention. The hospital is effectively a frontline combat zone where medical staff are fighting to save lives, while knowing that roughly 40% of bite victims will transform regardless of treatment. The psychological toll on doctors and nurses who are watching hundreds of patients die and reanimate is going to leave permanent trauma that will affect these people for the rest of their lives. The infection count reached 40,000 at 3:48 a.m., continuing the exponential growth pattern. We're now approaching 2% of the county population infected, and the math suggests we'll hit 100,000 infected by midday tomorrow. If current growth rates continue, the only factor slowing growth is the aggressive military response, combined with natural degradation of early infected. But we're still in a race against exponential mathematics that we might lose if we can't dramatically accelerate the rate at which we're neutralizing infected. At 3:54 a.m., Sarah and I realized we've been broadcasting for over 9 hours continuously. We're beyond exhausted, running entirely on adrenaline. But we're going to continue because thousands of people are still listening. And depending on this information, we've become the voice of Miami during its darkest hours. And we're going to maintain that voice until either the crisis ends or we can't physically continue. The first false dawn appeared at 4:01 a.m. That faint lightening of the eastern sky that precedes actual sunrise by over an hour. It's not daylight yet, but it's the promise of daylight, the evidence that night will eventually end. People who've been hiding in darkness for over 6 hours need that hope, need to know that morning is coming, and that they survived the worst night of their lives. At 4:08 a.m., military forces established a second major secure zone at Miami International Airport, clearing terminals and creating a defended perimeter around the airport complex. This creates a potential evacuation point where people could be flown out of Miami once passenger flights resume, and it secures critical infrastructure that will be necessary for recovery operations. The airport secure zone is being stocked with supplies airlifted in from other states, creating a logistics hub for the broader response effort. The Miami Beach evacuation reached 25,000 people by 4:14 a.m., meaning half the trapped population has been successfully evacuated. The boat operations are continuing through the pre-dawn hours, and organizers are optimistic they can complete full evacuation by 8 or 9 a.m. This would be a remarkable achievement, rescuing 50,000 people from an active outbreak zone using primarily civilian resources, with minimal official coordination. At 4:21 a.m., we received reports that degraded infected from early in the outbreak are beginning to die, permanently rather than just becoming immobile. Our 9 and our 10 infected are showing complete cessation of all activity, no movement, no response to stimuli, actual death rather than just immobilization. This confirms that infected don't remain a threat indefinitely even if not destroyed. They eventually degrade to the point where biological functions cease entirely. Areas that were overrun at the start of the outbreak will be safe to enter within 12 hours. As all the infected from that time period die off completely, the National Guard launched coordinated clearing operations at 4:28 a.m. in Liberty City, Overtown, and Little Haiti. These neighborhoods have high infected concentrations and limited resources for self-defense, making them priority areas for military intervention. The operations are expected to take several hours but should significantly reduce infected populations in those communities and allow survivors to access food, water, and medical care. At 4:34 a.m., the CDC confirmed that the prion infection can cross species barriers and affect mammals including dogs, cats, and potentially wildlife. This means pets can become infected and transmit to humans, and it raises the horrifying possibility of wildlife populations becoming infected reservoirs that could sustain the outbreak long after the human infected population is neutralized. We're looking at a potential long-term contamination scenario where the Everglades or other natural areas become permanently infected zones that pose ongoing risk. The sun began to rise at 4:42 a.m., actual dawn rather than false dawn, and the psychological impact on survivors is immediate and powerful. People who spent 8 to 10 hours in darkness hiding from infected are seeing daylight for the first time, and the relief is palpable in the radio communications we're monitoring. Dawn doesn't eliminate the threat. Infected are still active and dangerous in daylight, but being able to see them approach gives people time to react and defend themselves in ways that weren't possible in darkness. Part 3, Sunrise over the Ruins. This is Outbreak FM, 98.7 FM. And I'm David Morgan welcoming you to Day 2. It's 4:49 a.m. The sun is rising over Biscayne Bay, and if you survived the night, you've proven survival is possible. Sarah Chen and I have been broadcasting for over 10 hours, and we're going to see this through to the end. At 4:52 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez reported Jackson Memorial has treated over 2,000 patients overnight. 800 progressed to infection and were euthanized before reanimation. The hospital staff are traumatized, but continuing because stopping means abandoning thousands who need help. The National Guard neutralized approximately 8,000 infected overnight. Combined with new infections, we're looking at 50,000 total infections from 2.7 million population. That's 2% infected, which means 98% survived the night. The majority made it. At 5:13 a.m., Miami Beach evacuation was completed. Over 52,000 people rescued by boats in 8 hours. One of the largest civilian evacuations in American history. Accomplished primarily by volunteers risking their lives to save strangers. The first immune patient was discovered at 5:19 a.m. Someone bitten 12 hours ago who never transformed. Dr. Rodriguez is studying why, hoping this could lead to treatment. It's one case. Might be a fluke, but it's the first medical hope we've had. At 5:40 a.m., National Guard cleared Liberty City, Overtown, and Little Haiti. 12,000 civilians evacuated to secure zones. 3 soldiers bitten during operations, but neighborhoods are secured. The sun fully rose at 6:08 a.m. From our windows we see smoke from fires, abandoned cars, infected wandering streets, but also National Guard positions, civilian barricades, helicopters flying missions. Miami is broken, but fighting back. At 6:28 a.m., after 11 hours broadcasting, I need to say this, Sarah and I will continue until this crisis ends. Or we can't physically continue, if this frequency helped you survive. Stay with us, we're here for you. The infection count stabilized at 50,000 by 6:34 a.m. Exponential growth is slowing. Aggressive military response plus natural degradation is working. We're not winning yet, but we're not losing as fast. At 7:01 a.m., international aid arrived. Canadian military, transport with supplies and specialists, UK, France, Germany pledging assistance. The world is helping Miami. Dr. Rodriguez confirmed at 7:14 a.m. that all infected from the initial outbreak have degraded to immobility or death after 12 hours. Her timeline was accurate. Areas overrun early are now safe to enter. The CDC announced at 7:48 a.m. they've identified a compound that disrupts prion misfolding in lab tests. Treatment is weeks away, but there's a path forward beyond just killing infected. At 8:04 a.m., civilian defense networks across Miami, coordinated through social media, are creating sustainable neighborhood safe zones. Bottom-up organization proving communities can protect themselves with information and coordination. Military forces established major secure zones, protecting 50,000 civilians. By 8:37 a.m., downtown Miami, Brickell, Coconut Grove, and Airport are fully secured. These zones are being supplied by airlift and are sustainable long-term. The infection spread to Caribbean was confirmed at 9:09 a.m. Nassau, Bahamas dealing with outbreak from cruise ship passengers. International containment is now critical priority. At 10:23 a.m., after 16 hours broadcasting, Sarah and I are rotating shifts. We'll maintain continuous coverage with 4-hour rotations. Miami needs this frequency operating 24 hours. By noon, infection count peaked at 55,000. Military neutralizations now exceeding new infections. We've reached the turning point. Outbreak is being contained. At 2:14 p.m., the President declared Miami-Dade County a federal disaster area and committed unlimited resources to recovery. Active duty military deploying, FEMA mobilizing, CDC establishing permanent research facility. The first commercial power restoration occurred at 3:47 p.m. Utilities crews under military escort restoring services to cleared neighborhoods. Water treatment fully operational, cellular networks returning, infrastructure recovering. At 4:51 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez reported total patient count of 3,500 treated, 1,200 infected, all euthanized before reanimation. 0 hospital origin infections spread to community. Medical protocols worked. By 5:30 p.m., National Guard had cleared all major neighborhoods. Downtown, Brickell, Coral Gables, Coconut Grove, Kendall, and northern suburbs all secured. Infected concentrations reduced to scattered individuals easily neutralized by patrols. At 6:04 p.m., civilian casualties estimated at 12,000 dead, 55,000 infected, 67,000 total from 2.7 million population, 2.5% casualty rate, 97.5% survived. The majority of Miami survived the first 24 hours, and at 6:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after the first incident on Ocean Drive, the Miami-Dade Emergency Operations Center declared the outbreak contained. Military forces will continue clearing operations. Secure zones will remain operational, but exponential spread is stopped. New infections are minimal. The degradation timeline means existing infected will be neutralized within hours. We survived. Miami survived. Not unscathed, not without terrible cost. 67,000 people dead in 24 hours, but 2.6 million alive. The city endures. To everyone listening, everyone who fought through the night, everyone who helped strangers, everyone who showed courage when terror seemed rational, you saved Miami. Not government, not military. You, communities organizing, people helping people, individuals making survival possible for themselves and others. Sarah and I will continue broadcasting through recovery. We'll be here as long as Miami needs us. This is Outbreak FM, 98.7 FM. The voice that never stopped. The frequency that guided you through darkness. 24 hours complete. The outbreak is contained. Recovery begins. Welcome to day 3. Welcome to rebuilding. Welcome to whatever comes next. Viva Miami. Long live the Magic City.